Today was the third day of the Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright trial. The first half of the day, Hodlonaut was on the stand. First, questions were posed by Hodlonaut's lawyers and then by Craig Wright's lawyers, and then the judge had the opportunity to ask any other questions. The second half was Craig Wright on the stand. Hodlonaut's lawyer started out asking general life backstory, talked about when Hodlonaut got into Bitcoin, when he started Twitter, and really, after going through that chronology, then talked about the chronology specifically of this case. After we went through the timeline, we went through a lot of fake Toshi tweets, and we also cited the Craig Wright is a fraud hashtag, and we are all Hodlonaut hashtag. When Craig Wright's lawyer started asking questions of Hodlonaut, he was focusing a lot on the emotion and the purpose behind. He asked multiple times if this is how Hodlonaut usually speaks. After Craig Wright's lawyer was done, the judge pointed out that it seems as though there's been a lot of defamation towards Hodlonaut as well. She asked, how is this any different? Craig Wright took the stand, and his lawyer asked a lot of questions about the history. It felt a little repetitive of a lot of what we covered yesterday. Hodlonaut's lawyer began by highlighting Craig Wright's Wikipedia page and asking about his conviction status. After this, there was a very messy conversation about keys.
What would it take for you to then access the private keys?
The whole point is you don't need the private keys. That's what I'm trying to tell people.
Slice keys, private keys. There was a lot of back and forth about how, if he could, decrypt.
Once you have proven your identity, then you register the key. You don't do it the other way around. You can't come in later and go, I promise this was my key.
And then Craig Wright kind of went on a rant about Bitcoin not being encrypted.
I want to make sure that judges and courts understand that Bitcoin is not encrypted and it can be seized, frozen, and accessed under a court order.
So the judge's closing question was very interesting.
Just help me understand why proving in that way. I understand what you're saying, that writing with a signature is not proving identity. I understand your point. Why is that harder for you to do than whatever it is you're going through here and in other court cases?
It's not emotionally difficult. I mean, it was, but it's harder to do.
We'll start with all the witnesses tomorrow, but for now, good night.
Some interesting remarks, and we are excited to be joined by none other than our reporter on the ground, Mills, as well as our special guest today, Ben. Mills, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your excellent reporting. Day 3 in the books, we had both Hodlonaut and Craig Wright take the stand. Let's start first with Hodlonaut. What were the line of questioning? How did he handle it? And what did Craig Wright's team ask him specifically?
Yeah, it was kind of a little redundant of day 1, where it was his story, and it was the history, how he found out about Bitcoin, when he found out about Bitcoin, and then also his interaction and relationship with Twitter and how he grew on Twitter as well. And so talking about the Lightning Torch Trust Chain as well. So that was the initial path that his lawyer took. And then the actual specific tweets that this case is about were read and gone through. And specific words, were asked. I would say more than anything, Hodlonaut's lawyer was definitely focusing on making sure that there was a timeline in order of this happened, this was the situation, because when Craig Wright's lawyer started questioning, it was a little bit more scattered as far as timeline, and also saying that, he had all of this influence, all of these millions of views, all of this impression from, Jack Dorsey, and any of the people that through the Lightning Trust chain had become a part of his circle. And so citing groups on Telegram, citing, other network things. So after that initial overview, the cross-examination was very interesting because it was taking specific words and basically saying, do you speak like this normally? Is this, the way that you behave and carry yourself? And which it was kind of a loose argument in my estimation, but other people within the Taco Club group or other Telegram groups, their words were cited as well to maybe say that he kept this rough company. But then the thing that kind of was the most, I guess, tangential and seemingly not super related were some of his Hodlonaut's tweets about personal views. And I would say there were a couple, not supporting the current thing that were cited to maybe discredit his character or make him seem like he's a radical or that he's, not to be trusted. So that was kind of the overview of the Hodlonaut on the stand. But also, the judge asked her an interesting question at the end. She said, hey, anything else that you want to share? But she also said, it sounds like you've had a lot of defamation as well. And that was something that Hodlonaut's lawyer did bring up, was the various smear campaigns that CoinGeek through the bounty, but also there were a lot of name calling that was happening towards Hodlonaut. And some of the specifics were brought up in court as well. And so the judge in her closing statement said, it sounds like you've had a lot of defamation also. And she asked if Hodlonaut had any last words, and he said, I never really used the word defamation very much until this whole situation. So I'll kick it over to Ben. Ben also was able to be in court today, and it was cool. We had maybe 20, maybe that's a little high, maybe like 10 plebs that were there in support in person. That it was, and I think that Hodlonaut told me it really meant a lot to have people there showing up to support him. So Ben, what would you say?
Oh man, I flew in to Oslo last night because I knew this was kind of the meat of the trial. We got to. I'm only here for one day, unfortunately. I don't get to see all the other witnesses, but was able to see Hodlonaut testify, be cross-examined, as well as Craig Wright. And of course, I think the most interesting piece of the whole day and probably trial was Craig Wright being cross-examined, getting the questions that might actually push on some of the stories that he's been telling in the past. And the takeaway for me was with Hodlonaut, he started out in the morning. I think he kept his composure. I think he owned what he said. He didn't deny anything. He stayed grounded in reality, which is realistically what happened. So I wasn't really bullish or bearish after the morning session. But then Craig Wright took the stand, and even with his own lawyers, they decided to go through. I think the biggest chunk was like the Jameson Lopp, how many wrongs does it take to make a right article? And they went bullet by bullet on each of these kind of I guess refutation points as to why Craig may or may not be Satoshi. And I didn't think the answers even from his own legal team, they just didn't seem super prepped on their side. Craig seemed to be almost getting caught in lies from his own legal team, although it was okay. But then once the cross-examination started, literally within 90 seconds, the Hodlonaut's lawyer had to call him out and say, you literally just told a lie. By the way, let's remind you, you're under oath. And then it just, they pushed really hard on just the nature of kind of the Tulip Trust and, where these keys live. Craig was trying to, it seemed like, pull some roundabout technical jargon around Shamir secret keys, which ultimately, split a single private key up. But he seemed to be going into these nuances, trying to kind of deflect the main points. And by the end of it, about an hour and a half in, it was just there was just new stories being concocted on the fly from my perspective, and it didn't look great. That being said, it's in the legal system, it's it takes one slip up. I feel like one word, one little nuance, and the whole case can turn. But the day was certainly. I felt honored to be in the same room with such a talented storyteller. I'll put it that way. It was very clear that things were being kind of created on the fly. At some points, there were emails that he wrote when he was drunk, but it turns out it was actually someone else writing emails. I have a bunch of quotes here and notes that I tweeted out today, but there's a few gems. He's apparently going after Ethereum next because he created NFTs. There was a lot of pushing on the point that like signing with a private key does not conflate identity, which is actually true, but it would solve the entire case in his favor. And the very end point was, hey, like, I just don't want this to be over. It was essentially, he simultaneously was complaining about all the time and money he's wasting, all the patents he could have had if he didn't have to go to trial. And then the judge is basically like, hey, like, everyone agrees here, if you sign this transaction, like, that's good enough. He didn't want it to be over, was the quote. They're, again, more technical nonsense. Like, these lawyers and judges don't know, like, you know, what a key shard is. And so there was a lot of pushing on that. There was a lot of bringing up old points around, like, we kept hearing Bitcoiners, small block maxis, and how all we wanted to do was protect our drug usage, it was porn, dark web. We don't want to pay taxes. There was a lot of like kind of old points being brought up. And then like many times he brought up the fact that Bitcoin was unencrypted and that the court and law enforcement have the ability to essentially dictate the blockchain, that he would like, he would be able to, he destroyed his private keys or the Shamir shares of his private keys. But if there was a court order, then essentially the court could overrule the blockchain in some way, shape, or form. And then he was alluding to minor centralization. It was just all over the place. And you could tell there was a lot of deflecting, a lot of like kind of hopes that I think people would get wrapped up in the technical jargon and miss the point. But it was a wild one. I mean, I can dive into whatever we want to, but
So
it was.
I actually want to dive into that, Ben, because like I'm going to smooth brain this a little bit. Hearing what Craig Wright said in the clip that we shared, that based on a court order, Bitcoin can be forced and the blockchain can be forced to do what a court of law says. I honestly need to quit my job and like go back to the books, because I was always under the impression that actually was the one thing that made the Bitcoin blockchain so secure. Can you explain a scenario in which what Craig Wright is describing could come to fruition, or can you think of one?
Yeah, I think there's two scenarios. He kept alluding to the fact that Bitcoin was centralized around 13 miners, I think was the number he kept using, and that 53% of the hash power was concentrated with 3 companies. And while there is some concentration in the mining space, like, I guess what he was alluding to was like, if there was he almost made it sound like a court could just do like a op return and say basically the Bitcoin in the first 12 blocks belong to this person and not that person, and that like everything would magically fix itself and the Bitcoin would go where it wants. And that's just like not how proof of work exists. Like, I guess his point then he would make around centralization is the fact that like, okay, three companies, and don't quote me on this. I don't know my facts perfectly, but was essentially there's a few miners that own 53% of the hash rate. So I think what he was alluding to is they could 51% attack and like start back at the genesis and reallocate these coins. But I mean, you'd have to 51% attack for years at this point. I think the alternative, which might actually be the case, was Craig considers BSV Bitcoin. And maybe BSV could easily reorg, and whoever owns, you know, the tokens from the early blocks could be dictated by a court order. But he repeatedly said, you know, my mission is to let the court. He like was trying to empower the judge. Like, you are in the control. Like, law enforcement is in control. And if you say that these people own the coins, then they own the coins, and all you have to do is say it. And like, as we all know from like the technical understanding of how proof of work and blockchain works, like you really can't do that without some sort of massive reorg. And so my best guess was he maybe was alluding to the fact that BSV was Bitcoin and that would be easily reorged. But it's hard to follow, man. Like the longer it went on, the first 10 minutes were semi-coherent. 20 minutes in, you're like, okay, what the hell? And then, you know, 80 minutes in, it's just like there's just new things being made up on the fly. And yeah, that was my perception, at least.
It was almost 4 hours, to be clear. And the Hodlonaut was the first part of the day, and then they started Craig Wright's testimony before lunch. We broke for lunch, and then we were still with Hodlonaut or with Craig Wright's lawyer, and then we had maybe an hour a little bit more of Hodlonaut's lawyer doing cross-examination, but in total, it was about 4 hours that Craig Wright was on the stand. And it was a lot of different directions and a lot of plots that went different places. So it was kind of hard to, it wasn't a very circuitous day.
Mills, I want to follow up on our conversations we've had the last couple of days on the judge. On day one, we established that Hodlonaut's team was really walking this judge through just the history of Bitcoin, a highly technical conversation and layout. We had yesterday Craig Wright's lawyers present their opening remarks. Based on what I'm hearing of specifically during the Hodlonaut cross-examination, this judge is tracking very, very well. And even during this Craig Wright cross-examination, she's showing her technical understanding by saying something as simple as what Ben alluded to of, if you just sign off on this transaction, like, we're done here. So are we feeling as though the judge has a strong grasp on the technical components that will impact this case?
Yeah, and actually, it was a question I also asked Hodlonaut today after the trial, just like, how are you feeling? Do you feel like this judge is tracking? I think based on the way in which her final questions, both with Hodlonaut and with Craig Wright at the end of their cross-examination, they were very insightful questions and really do go to show that she's tracking. I mean, for this amount of nuance and information and history, because we're hearing, Craig Wright's basically life history. We're hearing the history of this technology, and we're hearing, Hodlonaut's personal history as well. So there's these 3 different storylines that are all intertwined. I feel like she is understanding enough that it seems very promising. I mean, I don't want to make speculations, but I was a little skeptical, I guess, maybe the first day, because Hodlonaut's lawyer was very serious and very, not monotone, but very kind of just businessy and going rather quick through a lot of things. There wasn't as much of a personality put with it. And then Craig Wright's lawyer was a little bit more affable and just not like smiley, but he really was a little bit more personable. And so I would say that probably made the day go by a lot quicker, was just their different bedside manners. However, now that kind of stoic nature was really impactful in the cross-examination with Craig Wright. And I do feel like, I mean, it's anyone's game, I guess, at this point, but I wanted to highlight something the judge said. It was an analogy that was actually brought up by Craig quite a few times about, if you have the car keys, it doesn't mean it's your car. And he kept going back to that point of, yeah, if he just signed something from block 1 through 12, that it really wouldn't prove anything. And he even cited Jameson Lopp of saying that if he did actually sign something, he would just assume that Craig Wright had stolen that key. And his answer to that, and the judge in her final question was, why don't you just do this? And his answer was surprising in that he said, if I do that, no one will ever look into anything else. As soon as I sign with a key, it's over. And if Craig ever signs with a key, all it will prove is that he stole it. That was a quote of him quoting Jameson Lopp. So he then kind of finished his talk by discussing that he wants to prove personally much more than technically. And he said many times on the stand that he never intends on signing anything, and talked a lot about smashing his thumb drive, his USB drive and hard drive with his shoe, not with a hammer, and that it was never to be done again. It was a very, he does not want to do it that way.
I thought one interesting piece was it kind of came out towards the end that the signing session, so he kept drilling in the fact that a private key signature does not conflate identity. And I think that's true. We all understand that. The judge understood that. That's where just because you have a car key doesn't mean you own the car analogy. And the judge was certainly technically capable, and everyone in the room, I think, was technically capable enough to understand that. The fact is, though, is that like that's all anyone is asking for, and that would be enough for like, you know, burden of proof, I think. That being said, I think there were a few things that Craig kept saying, which someone with a little more technical prowess could have called out. I wish either the lawyers or the judge herself would have said something around when he was saying that all it takes is a court order, and you know, Bitcoin can be owned by anyone. I wish someone with some knowledge of like proof of work, or potentially even, you know, what that would look like, which is a reorg or a 51% attack, or I wish someone would have pushed him on that. And then there were just, you know, there were certain things he kept going back on. He kept touching on algorithms. He kept touching on Shamir secret sharing, which is creating keys, you know, essentially just creating shards of a single key, similar to a multi-sig, where you have, you know, multiple keys that are signing, like a 3 of 5. There's 3 of 5 private keys. Shamir secret is essentially 3 shards of a single key, but very similar tech. He just kept alluding to these things. You know, he kept going back to like RPC, role procedure calls, like things that like, you know, my co-founder Ben Carman would have just been like, okay, like this is just a term, but you know, no one in the room really had, I think, the prowess to call him out on it. But the big one though was, you know, kept saying law enforcement and courts have the ability to determine who owns what, and that's just simply not the case. And I wish maybe someone would have pushed him on that, because for those of us in the audience that know how Bitcoin works, it was that was a bit of a gap in the argument there, which no one was called out for. I would have loved to hear his answer there.
I'm sure there will be plenty of other things that we're going to look back on and say when this raw footage, which our team is currently uploading, we are getting it to all the appropriate media outlets as well. Bear with us. I see it in the chats. People are asking. It is over 4 hours of raw footage from today's court case, so please just bear with us. Internet bandwidth and upload speeds are really what's holding us back, but we are also getting it to all of the appropriate parties that have asked for it as well, so it is not just coming exclusively from Bitcoin Magazine. I do want to touch on just, there was a pushback that I believe, Ben, you mentioned, that Hodlonaut's lawyers pressed Craig Wright saying, you more or less, I'm going to paraphrase, that he was lying and that he is under oath, to please be careful because you are under oath. With the witnesses coming up in the next few days, if any of these witness testimonies, whether they be Craig Wright's witness or they be Hodlonaut's witness, if any of their information begins to conflict with what Craig Wright has said, can either Hodlonaut's lawyers or the judge ask Craig to go back on the stand?
I certainly don't know. Mills would probably be the one to
No, this is for our Norwegian legal expert, specific Mills.
Wow. No, I don't know specifically, but what was cool, because so the first half, Hodlonaut's cross-examination and examination was all in Norwegian, but for Craig Wright's, it was all in English. So we were able, the judge did the kind of swearing in English as well. So we were able to really hear it was similar to, I taking the stand in America, but it was more, I don't know specifically truly if they could call, I don't know if there's legal precedent for that, but it was very clear that there is no leeway for lying. I don't know. And it said, and this is a criminal act if you do lie on the stand. So I don't know exactly. I'll look into that and ask around at court too. It's a great question. Oh,
thank you.
One other thing too.
Please.
You mentioned we are going to be uploading, as I mentioned, the entire Craig Wright cross-examine and examine was in English. So we are uploading that. After we finish uploading it to our press pool on Dropbox for all the media outlets, we will upload that onto our YouTube. But the Norwegian examination and cross-examination of Hodlonaut, we are working with some Norwegian plebs to get that transcribed so that we can post that and it can be read. Because as much as we could also publish that, I know there's a lot of non-Norwegian speaking plebs that would love. So we're doing a similar coverage and sharing, just in the most suitable way for the language.
Thank you for all the work you guys are doing out there and getting all this information out to everyone as timely as possible. I want to just get a sense of, I know you had an opportunity to speak to Hodlonaut after the case. What were his feelings after day 3, after both cross-examinations, as well as did you have the opportunity to speak to someone from Craig Wright's camp, and same question directed towards his camp?
Yeah, he said that Hodlonaut said that he was feeling relieved. I mean, today really was kind of the biggest thing for him. And one thing he pointed out was, he didn't have to really prep so much because he was going on the stand to tell the truth. And so it wasn't as much as rehearsing and memorizing so much. But as far as Craig Wright's team, I've been talking quite a bit with the CoinGeek media people, but as far as his legal counsel, I haven't had any direct contact. We actually, when we were filming the interview after court today with Hodlonaut, they were filming us filming because they're filming a documentary. Calvin Air has a production company that's doing a documentary. So it was a little meta feeling, but I will work to get a kind of status update from their side as well. And more than anything, it's just in process, and it's cool to be able to get a moment in time because we don't, it's begun. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know how all of these witnesses are going to go. And I do have an update. As of now, Craig has 10 witnesses, and technically Hodlonaut has 4, one of them being a company that is 3 different witnesses, but it's technically counted as 4 witnesses. So it's an imbalance similar to the lawyers, but Hodlonaut having 4 witnesses, Craig Wright currently having 10.
I'm confused. I thought last we spoke, the judge had asked Craig Wright and his team to whittle their witness list down. Have we just got it doubled?
I think the number that I had was incorrect, or I had just given the Hodlonaut number both to Craig Wright. I'm counting the names, and I think within some of the names, there's multiple witnesses. Apologies, because I am reading a lot of Norwegian legal documents, but I am honestly trying to be as good of a reporter. It's a language barrier, but that's honestly, today was very cool to be able to actually hear the inflection and know what was being said with what inflection. It was very helpful as far as being sure that I was accurately transcribing.
Thank you very much, Mills. Before we wrap here, any final words before we close for a commercial break? I know we're going to get another update from you tomorrow as well as Friday. And then the final 2 will be Monday and Wednesday of next week. The court is not going to be in session on Tuesday.
I have a couple, just some quick hit ones. Craig apparently let go of his legal team right before this case because he wanted to bring in more witnesses and they wanted legal documents. I thought that was very interesting. It came out today that he has no intention of ever signing this transaction, and that the original, in his words, the original signing session with Gavin was never intended to prove he was Satoshi. So I think it's obvious, or it's clear why there would maybe be some misunderstanding as to whether anyone would be able to determine whether he is or isn't Satoshi. And then from my gut, it just seems like there's a long way to go. I think this is an interesting day with Craig and Hodlonaut taking the stand. But it seems like Craig's team is positioning maybe more towards like Hodlonaut inciting the community to, stand up against Craig. They quoted a lot of his Telegram chats and things outside of Twitter. And so it'll just be interesting to see, like, I'm sure they have an attack vector here that they're planning on going after. And yeah, I mean, it's all just law. And so, even though you feel good one day and bad the next, like it'll be really interesting to see how this progresses when you get to the nitty gritty of like what the actual law is and where the attack vectors are. But it's a team of 9 smart lawyers, it seems like. So, we'll see.
Mills, any final words?
I'm excited to start going through the witnesses. I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm a little trepidatious in what Ben was just mentioning is the previous team of lawyers wanted more documents and more emphasis on collecting documents for proof. And Craig Wright on the stand was saying how he wants witnesses, and he had been trying. He has 70 apparently now, and is trying to get to 100. And talked about tracking people down all over the world just to kind of corroborate. And it seems like he's trying to do this relational corroboration. So I'm very interested to see what these witnesses will say. And it's been interesting to see on Twitter some of the names that he's even mentioned. You know, Twitter's a very deep place to be right now. And there's a lot of people coming forward saying that they would testify, or I encourage everyone to, there's Bit Norbert, and there's a couple other BSVers that are also real-time live tweeting. And I'm also doing kind of a summary recap every 10-ish minutes of kind of what we're moving on to and what we're discussing. So that's a fun way to follow along, and we will be updating some of the footage hopefully tonight.
Yes, I will admit I may or may not have caught the first flurry of tweets. Those start at 3 a.m. Eastern time, midnight Pacific time. That's when the trial kicks off. Follow Specific Mills for all these trial updates as well. Thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for your work on the ground, Mills.